Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? Let's proclaim the greatest radio show.
Welcome, fans, to another great episode of The Spread. I'm your host, Jim Sella, in studio with co-host Jay Dash. We're going to break down some more fantasy football for you. We got picks 76 through 100. Am I correct on this?
Please believe.
I am the math major of the two, so I should be able to count to 100.
I would also like to say we're going to do a segment after we do all these rankings about just updates to injuries and some of the sleepers we like and where we like them being picked this season.
Listen to all the fantasy segments or you will lose.
But let's start with number 76 here. New England wide receiver Brandon Lafell. Now, there's a lot
Brandon Lafell, and I can't get up.
Listen, there's a lot of talk Tom Brady could be suspended for just one game or maybe even no games. So we'll have to see how that turns out in the end. Now, if that does happen, Edelman, who we already talked about earlier on one of our segments, he needs to be moved up a little bit. Lafell definitely needs to be moved up a little bit from 76 here. I mean, you look last season, he had 74 receptions on 119 targets, 953 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He had no receptions in the first 2 games, though, so he really did that over a 14-game span. He had 2 100-yard games, including 11 receptions for 124 yards and a touchdown for Chicago. And he also came up with 98 yards versus Detroit and 97 yards at Buffalo. He had 9 or more targets 6 times, 2 multi-TD games. Now, without Tom Brady, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. They got Gronkowski. He's probably still going to be thrown to without Brady. Edelman, he's probably still going to be thrown to somewhat without Brady. Besides that, though, it gets a little dicey. But Brandon Lafell is definitely the third best target out here. I mean, you got Amendola, Josh Boyce, Aaron Dobson,
Don't forget
Brandon
you got
Gibson.
Blunt suspended for a game, too, so they're not going to be running the ball too much in that first game. So Lafell might be a good first-day get.
Yeah, but once Brady gets back, I mean, his value goes way up, so you got to pay attention. If Brady doesn't get suspended for 4 games, I mean, all these New England guys got to go up a little bit. Number 77, Martavis Bryant.
I've seen Bryant go as high as like 50 in 3 wide receiver leagues. I was doing some mocks.
Yeah, now you have to tell me, was it a standard league or was it a PPR?
I think that one happened to be a standard league. I was looking for PPR, but I somehow stumbled into a 14-team leagues mock draft and didn't know what was going on.
Well, listen, I've seen him in the 50s in PPR leagues as well. The reason I have him a little lower, I still think this is somewhat high for him. I mean, he only had 26 receptions on 49 targets in 10 games last season. That's 2.6 receptions a game, but he did come up with 549 yards and 8 TDs. Now, 6 of his 8 TDs came in his first 4 games played. He only had 2 TDs over his final 6 games. He had 2 100-yard games, including 8 catches for 143 yards and a touchdown at New York, the Jets, that is. He had 4 receptions or less in all but 1 game, though, and 2 receptions or less 5 times. Now, I do think he's going to be more involved in the offense this season, no doubt, and I really think the Pittsburgh Steelers play better when they have that third option behind in Antonio Brown and a Le'Veon Bell that has high upside, and that's Martavis Bryant here.
He's looked good in the preseason.
Yeah, trust me, in standard leagues, I really like him because he's going to put up the yardage and he's going to put up the touchdowns. But in PPR, he's not going to have too many receptions still because, let's face it,
maybe
you don't want to take too
catches.
much away from Antonio Brown. You still got to feed that guy the ball. And you got to feed Le'Veon Bell, too. There's not many more targets to go around. So while I want him involved more, I see some inconsistency out of him this season. I see a better season. And let's not forget Marcus Wheaton, too. Everybody's saying he's going to have a better season. There's only so many targets to go around. It got to be Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell as the top 2. Martavis, he's going to score touchdowns and get yards. I just don't see him being targeted too much every game.
I see him getting about 50 catches, probably maybe break 1,000 yards. He can get somewhere around 1,000, 1,100. And 8 TDs to 10 TDs sounds about right. It's not like he's going to double that TD output just because he did it in his rookie year. He's not going to go out and catch 16.
78, Ameer Abdullah, running back from Detroit.
He said he did a borderline good job in his preseason game, so he's working hard to get better.
Now, he was their second-round pick this season out of Nebraska. Reggie Bush is obviously gone. They still have Julius Bell in the backfield, and he's still considered the starter. Although Julius Bell right now, he's actually recovering from, Achilles and knee surgery, so he's expected to be
sand in his vag.
He's expected to be ready for the beginning of the season, but still, there's a little opportunity for Abdullah to show what he has and maybe grab some more playing time early in the season because of this Bell injury. But really, everything I'm hearing is Abdullah could play very well in this offense and eventually take over the lead role. But if he doesn't, I still think he's going to be involved. I mean, Reggie Bush was still involved while Joique Bell was there. Now, he didn't put up huge numbers, but Reggie Bush, I mean, he's fallen off a little bit there in Detroit. Abdullah, he's still young. I think this guy can be a huge piece to this offense this season, even if Joique Bell keeps that starter job. But there's also the possibility that Abdullah takes the job away from Bell by the end of the season. Number 79, Matt Ryan, quarterback of Atlanta.
This is the only person on your list that I don't agree with really where he's at. I think Ryan is a lot lower on the list.
He should be lower.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fantasy-wise, I'm not a huge Matt Ryan fan. Dude's only had 130 touchdown season in his whole career. So it's not like he's putting up beast touchdowns.
Well, if you look, man, you're not going to find too many 30-touchdown quarterbacks this late in the draft. Oh, well, I mean, it depends on how your draft goes, too, how many people's in your draft.
Right.
When quarterbacks go. But, I mean,
if you're in a 6-team league, everybody's got a beast quarterback.
Really, according to my rankings here, you're not going to find too many 30-touchdown quarterbacks after Matt Ryan. But, I mean, Matt Ryan, he had somewhat of a down season last year, too. He could have a better season, but he still threw for 4,694 yards, man.
He actually had a better season last year than the year before.
Yeah, the past couple years, I think. Actually, he had that one very big season. Then he's been somewhat of a letdown, but he's still been a pretty decent quarterback. I mean, 28 TDs last year isn't that bad. The interceptions were up a little bit to 14.
He's thrown for 4,000 yards the last 4 years in a row, but the touchdowns went 29, 32, 26, 28. So it's nothing terrible, but it's not great. And now the things that suck are the interceptions at 12, 14, 17, and 14.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty consistent, though, so at least you know what you're getting there. I mean, he had six 300-yard games last season, including 448 versus New Orleans. 4 of his 6 300-yard games came over the final 5 weeks of the season, too, so he got better later in the season.
One of the receivers were hurt, too, I thought, early in the year, weren't they?
Yeah, they had some injuries really all over their offense. They got rid of Steven Jackson finally. They got some younger running backs in here in Tevin Coleman. They still have Devonta Freeman. We'll have to see how the backfield works out, but they have 2 pretty decent running backs. They still have Julio Jones, one of the best receivers in the game. Roddy White's getting older, but he's still a pretty decent receiver. And then behind those 2, I mean, Justin Hardy, Leonard Hankerson, and they brought over Jacob Tamme as well. So the options behind White and Jones aren't great, but we'll have to see how that turns out. But I still like Matt Ryan. I mean, 8 multi-TD games. He had 4 TDs at Green Bay. 4 of his 8 multi-TD games in the final 6 weeks. Like I said, he was playing better towards the end of the season. Maybe something clicked, and he can start this season how he ended last. But if you look, man, they throw a ton. This is the kind of quarterbacks I like, the guys who throw a ton. And the Falcons may be a bad team again, too, so they could be playing from behind as well. But 37 or more attempts in 13 games last season. He's throwing a ton. That's the kind of quarterbacks I want if I don't have one of the top ones. Number 80, Cam Newton, quarterback from Carolina.
Does he lose value with the ACL tear for Kelvin Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I wanted to bring up. Now, we just heard that Kelvin Benjamin got hurt. Now, obviously, he tore his ACL, so he's
pulled a hammy too. So their top 2 wideouts are now out. They got Ted Ginn though.
Well, with Kelvin Benjamin done, you have to drop him off these rankings that we made here.
We have him at 30.
Devin Funchess, I still wouldn't have him ranked yet. I'm not going to put him in the top 80 just because Kelvin Benjamin got hurt. Now, Cam Newton, I'm still going to put him at 80 here, but I wouldn't mind if you did drop him on this list a little bit. But I still like Cam Newton, and he's a guy that had over 500 yards rushing last year with 5 rushing TDs. So that's the extra element that he gives you that plays up very well in fantasy.
He's the team's leading rusher, I believe, since he joined Carolina.
Oh, I'm sure. Now, he had 3,127 yards passing last season, just 18 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. But like I said, he added those 5 rushing touchdowns. That plays up as well. And he did that all in 14 games, too. He was injured a little bit last season, wasn't fully healthy. So you could see all those numbers go up a little bit, too. I still like Cam Newton moving forward. Now, he only had 1 300-yard game with 306 at Philly. He had 5 multi-TD games in the air, 3 of those coming over the final 6 weeks, though. So he's another guy that showed improvement late in the season, and that's when he was getting healthier, too. And then he had a 100-yard rushing game, too. This is where Cam Newton's legs play up in fantasy. 107 yards at Cincinnati. And look, 41 or more yards rushing 7 times. So he's pretty consistent with his rushing yards as well. And late in the season, like I said, when he got a little bit healthier, he played so much better. 197 rushing yards over his final 3 games played. That's what you want to see out of him to make him a starting quarterback in fantasy.
His rookie year was his best fantasy year when he threw for 21 touchdowns, but he also ran for 14 touchdowns. He had over 4,000 yards in his rookie season, passing, and 706 rushing. He's struggled, I don't want to say struggled, but he hasn't been able to duplicate the touchdowns. Last year, 18 throwing, 5 rushing, and the year before, 24 throwing and 6 rushing. So he did have 30 again combined, but that rookie year was definitely his biggest year. And losing Kelvin Benjamin might keep the ball in his hands more, and he might start running a little more. D'Angelo Williams is out. Can James Stewart stay healthy? So this offense with a healthy Cam Newton may be centered around him, and he still may be able to get the points on the ground, not necessarily through the air.
Well, Greg Olson's still out there too, remember. And Greg Olson is a pretty good tight end, a guy we already talked about. And in fact, I might actually move Greg Olson up the list a tiny bit just because of the Benjamin injury, because Olson should now be the number 1 target out there in Carolina. Number 81, Isaiah Crowell, running back from Cleveland.
Oh, Cleveland, we don't need to talk about him. He's done.
Well, look, he had 607 yards, 8 touchdowns, 9 receptions for 87 yards, but he had no more than 2 receptions in any game. Now, he had no more than 11 carries in any of his first 8 games, though he did score 4 TDs in that span. But then he had 12 or more carries in 6 of his last 8 games, so he pretty much became the Cleveland's not feature back, but main back in that system later in the season. He scored 4 TDs over that span as well. He had 2 multi-TD games. Now, if you look, all they have out there is Terrence West, and they drafted Duke Johnson, a guy who I actually have on this list pretty soon because I think he can grab a big role for this team. But right now, he's questionable with a hamstring injury. This is their 3rd-round pick this season. They have questions at quarterback as well. And they didn't bring
Wait. Cleveland has questions at quarterback? Are you sure we're talking about the right team here?
Yeah. But then they brought in Hartline and Bowe, too. So the receivers, they're not great
dumb and
out
garbage.
There. So Crowell, I mean, there is a chance they try to feature him early in the season. It depends. Is he going to run away with that role, or is he going to falter and then maybe give Duke Johnson a chance or Terrence West a little bit more playing time? We'll have to see. But, I mean, Isaiah Crowell showed some good things last season. And, I mean, 8 TDs without touching the ball 20 times a game, that's not too bad out of him. I could see him taking somewhat of a step up this year if he can hold on to that job and not let Duke Johnson take it away from him.
Don't fumble the job, Crowell.
Number 82, Chris Ivory, running back from the New York Jets.
He's squeaky clean.
He had 821 yards last season, 6 touchdowns, just 18 receptions for 123 yards and a touchdown.
His hands are all soapy.
He had 2 100-yard games with 107 at New England being his best. He had more than 17 carries just once all season. He had 13 or less carries 11 times, 51 yards or less 11 times, and really, I mean, he is their starter because all they have is Bilal Powell, Zach Stacy, Daryl Richardson. So he's a guy. You got to give him a chance. You got to draft him around this range, see if he can give you some value. But, I mean, there's not much upside, I believe, coming from a New York Jets running back. But, I mean, if you have your running backs by now, you're going to skip Chris Ivory and you're going to go for the next tight end or the next receiver or whatever. But if you missed your running backs at this point, I mean, Chris Ivory is one of the better ones to have because at least you know he's going to be the starter to begin with.
The next guy on the list has got the best nickname out of all the running backs.
Muscle Hamster.
Muscle Hamster.
Yep, number 83, Doug Martin, Tampa Bay running back. A lot of people think this guy's going to have a big season or something. I mean, he had the big rookie year, and he was drafted very high coming into the next season. But we've seen over the past couple
rolled
years.
out, and then Martin started dropping off.
Yeah, he really hasn't done much over the past couple years. Last season, 494 yards, 2 TDs, 13 receptions with 64 receiving yards in 11 games. Had one 100-yard game. It was the last game of the season versus New Orleans, obviously, who can't stop the run. He had 108 yards on a season-high 19 carries. He also added 96 yards at Carolina one game, but he had no more than 58 yards in any other game. He had 27 yards or less 5 times, no more than 4 yards receiving in any of his final 8 games played. They have Bobby Rainey out there, who led Tampa Bay running backs with 33 receptions and 315 yards. They have Charles Sims, who has a little bit of upside out there. Mike James is out there. Doug Martin, there's no guarantee he keeps his role, but they said he's going to be the starter to start the season. So, I mean, you got to take a chance. If you missed out on your running backs, Doug Martin is a guy you want to take a chance with. And if Jameis Winston shows he can be a valuable player his rookie season, I mean, that could open things up for Martin. So there still is a possibility he can be valuable to you. But I'm not high on him. I just don't think the addition of Jameis Winston is going to make Doug Martin a 1,000-yard running back again. But like I said, he's starting, so you got to take that chance on him at this point.
If Evans and Vincent Jackson can push the ball downfield with Winston's big arm, that gives Martin the best chance to be successful, in my opinion.
Number 84.
Julius Thomas.
Yep, tight end from the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Way
now.
more valuable in Denver. If he was with Denver, I have a feeling you'd have him rated in the top 25.
Yeah, it'd be a lot higher. But, I mean, if you look with Denver last season, he had 43 receptions on 60 targets, 489 yards, although he did have 12 touchdowns to go along with that. So he was a big red zone target. But they had, Emmanuel Sanders out there with well over 100 targets. They had Demaryius Thomas out there with well over 100 targets. So there's only so many balls to go around.
5 targets.
Wes Welker. But look, he also only did this in 13 games as well, and he wasn't targeted in the final game either. So it was still a pretty decent season for him.
Manning was pissed.
He had 8 catches for 104 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first game of the season, though, and then no more than 66 yards in any other game. He had 9 TDs over his first 5 games, and then just 3 TDs over his final 8 games. 2 receptions or less in 6 of his last 7 games. His drop in production had to do with Peyton Manning, too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Peyton was a little hurt late in the year.
Yeah, he did not look good out there either. Now, I like what Jacksonville has at receiver, although nothing too great. Allen Robinson, a guy we talked about in our last segment, I think he has the best chance to succeed in this offense. And then you got Allen Hurns, who showed he can put up some big games for you. Marquise Lee's hurt right now. I think he's expected to miss something like 2 more weeks, but he could come back and play a role for this team. And then there you got Julius Thomas, and let's not forget Blake Bortles. It's his second year. He could show some improvement. But even if not, I mean, young guys, they like to go to their tight end as well. But I wouldn't get too excited about Julius Thomas. I mean, he had one of the best quarterbacks in the league last season. He didn't put up huge numbers because there were so many targets around him. But I still think there's some other targets around him where you're not going to feature Julius Thomas in this offense.
I got him in the 11th round in a 10-team league. Is that good value?
Yeah, that's real good value. I think if this was a 10-team league, I have him something like the middle of the 8th round. So I think you got very good value in that pick. But if you look last season, man, I mean, Jacksonville's tight ends didn't do too much. I mean, Julius Thomas is definitely a better talent than Clay Harbor or Mercedes Lewis, but Harbor, 26 catches, 289 yards and a touchdown. Lewis, 18 receptions for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns. So nothing great out of their tight ends out there last year. So Bortles wasn't relying on them too much last season. I don't expect big things out of Julius Thomas. If he can stay healthy a full season, though, I mean, his numbers should go up outside of the touchdowns, I believe.
I agree. What about Michael Pink Floyd we got here at number 85, wide receiver out of Arizona? Is he going to be the number 1 target now outside of Larry Fitzgerald?
Well, he was supposed to be the number 1 target last season, and really, I had high expectations for this guy because in 2013, he had 65 receptions on 112 targets, 1,041 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And really, he was supposed to be the main guy coming into the next season, which was last year. But he had somewhat of a down season, 47 receptions on 99 targets, 841 yards, and 6 touchdowns. But this is still a guy I'm pretty high on, and if they can find any kind of consistency in their passing game, I see a better season out of Michael Floyd. And, I mean, he showed in spurts last season he can put up the big games. He had 3 100-yard games, including 8 catches for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the one good thing about that came in the last game of the season. So maybe they finally got on the same page out there in Arizona, and you see him take that next step forward this season.
It's not going to be the same quarterback that was thrown to him in the last game.
Yeah, who knows?
Palmer's going to get broke in the 3rd game.
But he had 2 multi-TD games. But he also had 2 or less receptions 8 times. Right now, he's out with a injury to his fingers, but he's expected to come back at some point soon here and be ready for the beginning of the season. But really, they have Fitzgerald. John Brown is another guy that could step up for him. We talk about him. I don't know if it's at the end of this segment or our next segment, but he's a guy I kind of like as well, with Fitzgerald dropping off a little bit, I believe. But they got Jerome Brown out there, too. I think Michael Floyd is definitely the best talent at wide receiver in Arizona.
I still think with the questions at the quarterback position, mostly health-wise with Palmer, I think Larry still ends up having the best year out of those wide receivers. Not saying he's going to have a beast year, but I think there's just going to be a little more turmoil, and he's definitely catching more than 2 touchdowns like last year. I think Larry's numbers are going to be closer to what Michael Floyd did.
So you would take Larry Fitzgerald before Michael Floyd in the draft, is what you're saying?
For me, and I mean, I could be wrong, but I just trust Larry more, and with the fact that the quarterback position's still up in the air, when you have that solid, trusted veteran, and Larry catches anything thrown within 10 feet of him, so.
Well, Fitzgerald had more catches last season. He also had more targets as well, but he had less yards and less touchdowns. I think Michael Floyd's the bigger play guy. I'd go with Floyd over Fitzgerald, and I really can't.
In a PPR league, is the couple more touchdowns Floyd going to get worth the less receptions that he's going to get?
Well, I mean, if they put up the same seasons they had last season, Fitzgerald probably might be a little bit better of a play just because of the extra receptions. But I see Floyd taking a step up this season. He's too talented to have the same numbers he had last season. I see a better season out of him. And Larry Fitzgerald, I see something like the same type of season, maybe a couple more touchdowns, but he really lost the step, man. There's no denying that he's not the same receiver he used to be. Let's move on to 86 here. Alfred Blue, running back from Houston. Now we know that Arian Foster, he's going to be out for at least 4 weeks. I'd guess more around 6.
Yeah, I think it's 6.
8.
I think he's going to end up getting put on that short-term IR list.
Right.
So it'll be after the 6th game that he'll be allowed to come back.
But I mean, Blue has showed before when Foster was hurt, he can put up good games for you. Now, with all the starting running backs gone in this draft, I think Alfred Blue would be a good pick here just to get some games out of early in the season. And then, I mean, you got to pay attention to the waiver wire. There are going to be running backs that pop up out of nowhere to give you good games. And maybe even, I mean, look at C.J. Anderson last year. He was on the waiver wire for most of the season in most leagues. And then Denver puts him in as the starting running back. Now he's a top 10 fantasy choice. So you never know what you're going to find later in the season. You know Alfred Blue's going to start for Houston, and Houston can always run the ball. No matter how bad their quarterback is, they always seem to find a way to have good running backs in terms of fantasy and in real life as well. I mean, last season, 528 yards, 2 TDs, 15 receptions for 113 receiving yards and a touchdown. Both of his rushing touchdowns came over the final 4 weeks of the season. It's all about Arian Foster, though. With him out, Alfred Blue is going to be the starting running back out there. And you're going to get your first half of the fantasy season as Alfred Blue, a starting running back. You can find him in, the 7th, 8th round. I mean, that's not too bad right there.
We all know he's Will Ferrell's boy.
You're my boy, Blue. All right, number 87, Steve Smith, wide receiver from Baltimore.
Woo, stay up, old man. I like Steve Smith. I don't care if he plays for the Ravens.
Yeah, I've always liked Steve Smith. Now,
he's not going to do what he did last year, though.
I mean, even last year, his numbers weren't too great. I mean, 79 receptions on 133 targets, 1,065 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He wasn't dominant last season, although he started out pretty dominant. I mean, at the beginning of the season, he looked like he was going to be one of the best receivers in the game, and then he really tailed off later in the season. But he had double-digit targets 6 times, 3 of his first 4 games, and 3 of his last 4 games, actually. But he had 5 or more receptions 11 times, 4 100-yard games, all those within the first weeks of the season. Like I said, he was hot to begin the season, then he fell off. I mean, he's an old guy. He already said this is his last season. They drafted Brashard Perryman, who could actually be the best receiver on this team.
He's been a little banged up early.
Yeah, I'm still going to go with Steve Smith over Perryman right now, but behind Perryman and Smith, it's Marlon Brown, Kamar Aiken, and they also drafted Max Williams. I don't expect him to be a beast immediately. So Steve Smith's still the number 1 guy here, but don't be surprised if Perryman overtakes him by season's end. But Steve Smith, I mean, he's not a top top pick anymore, but he still gives you value out there. You know Joe Flacco can fling the ball.
I was just going to say Steve Smith's at a liability because he has Joe Flacco. Luck you, Flacco. Garbage.
Number 88, man, your boy Larry Fitzgerald.
That's it. We already talked a little Larry.
Wide receiver out of Arizona. You can see I don't have Michael Floyd too far ahead of him. Obviously, I think they're still pretty close. And mostly because of the questions out there at quarterback. I mean, what is going to happen during the season at quarterback? And, I mean, whoever is in a quarterback, they got to decide who their number one target is. We seen last season different quarterbacks chose different favorite targets, and that's just the way it goes. But Larry Fitzgerald, he's definitely not as good of a talent as Michael Floyd right now, I don't think.
I'm looking on this list ahead a little bit, and I'm seeing a lot of wide receivers and a cheater. So fans, stay tuned in, because I think we all know who the cheater is.
Yeah. But Fitzgerald last season, 63 receptions on 103 targets, 784 yards with just the 2 touchdowns. But it came in just 14 games as well, so those numbers could go up a little bit if he plays a full season. He had 9 or more targets 6 times, still 5 or more receptions 6 times. He had 2 100-yard games, including 7 catches for 160 yards and a touchdown versus Philadelphia. Now, he has a foot injury right now, but he's not expected to miss the start of the season. Like I said, Michael Floyd, I'm guessing, is the number one out there. And another reason I'm not so sure on Larry Fitzgerald, man, I think they want to get younger at receiver. John Brown is a guy that I think is going to step up. If Larry Fitzgerald shows any kind of decline this season, John Brown could be the guy that steps in and be that number 2.
They just gave Larry a contract, so if he steps back, they're not going to be looking too good.
Well, I mean, you can't expect huge things out of this offense to begin with. And, I mean, you got to know that Larry Fitzgerald, he's losing a step right now.
He will never lose a step. Quit saying that.
Dude, 63 receptions last season. That's not Larry Fitzgerald.
Well, his foot was broken, man. He was all right. He played good when he was healthy.
2 touchdowns. Come on, man.
You just quit hating on the guy. Hate on this next guy. That's fine.
I'm surprised you even like Larry Fitzgerald, seeing he's from Pitt.
Well, I just don't like Pitt College. I don't think just because I live near Pitt College, I have to be a Pitt fan. That's all. I don't hate Pitt.
All right, number 89, Charles Johnson, wide receiver from Minnesota.
Dude's garbage.
No, I really like this guy. Last year was his first season seeing game action. He had 31 receptions on 58 targets for 475 yards and 2 touchdowns.
2 touchdowns? Come on, man.
Well, that came in 12 games played. That's 2 less games than Larry Fitzgerald played. Now, like I said, this was his first season seeing game action as well. He had 6 receptions for 60 yards through his first 5 games played, too. So he wasn't a part of the offense at the beginning of the season, but over his final 7 games, 25 receptions, 415 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He had a 100-yard game with 4 catches for 103 yards and a touchdown versus the New York Jets. Now, Minnesota, they brought in Mike Wallace to be the number 1 receiver out there. This is a guy that had 67 receptions for 862 yards and 10 touchdowns for him. Minnesota, their leading receiver last season was Greg Jennings. So Mike Wallace is somewhat going to fill that spot, I guess. I mean, Mike Wallace is a deep threat. Charles Johnson's more of a guy that I see getting more targets than Mike Wallace possibly, though.
I like Johnson's value here just because I think our boy Teddy Bridgewater is going to take a step up.
Yeah, you got to remember, this is his second year, so there's definitely the possibility he takes a step up. And I believe from all the rookie quarterbacks from last season, Bridgewater has the best shot to be the best quarterback still.
He has the most parts around him, at least.
Behind Charles Johnson and Mike Wallace, it's Jarius Wright and Cordero Patterson. Now, they tried with Cordero Patterson last season. It didn't work out very well. Is he going to get a chance this season? I'm not so sure, but I know Charles Johnson is a good receiver, and I can see him having a very good season, and this being a very good pick here at pick 89. Number 90, Marcus Colston, wide receiver from New Orleans.
He's old. Hate on him.
Well, he's old too. I wasn't hating on Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald was one of the best wide receivers of my time. And Marcus Colston was good for a while there too, man. But last season, just 59 receptions on 99 targets, 902 yards. Still had 5 touchdowns, not too bad. 2 100-yard games. Double-digit targets 3 times. 4 of his 5 TDs came in the final 6 weeks of the season, too. So maybe Drew Brees can find him a little bit more this season in the end zone.
They got rid of Kenny Stills, so it opens up, and Jimmy Graham. So that's definitely going to open up some more targets for Colston.
Yeah, I see more targets for Colston this season. I still don't see huge numbers because he's not the same player he used to be. But Brandon Cooks, he's definitely the number 1 receiver out there. Colston's going to be the number 2. They have Josh Hill and Ben Watson at tight end. There's nothing great there. I mean, Josh Hill could turn into a decent option for him at some point this season, but Nick Toon, Brandon Coleman they have out there, a wide receiver. Colston's going to see a lot of targets. I still see a good season for Breeze, and I see a big season from Brandon Cooks and a solid season from Marcus Colston. Nothing like he used to do.
Solid gold.
He might be a little bit more consistent this year, though.
He was a little hurt. He's been banged up a lot in his career, but he was a little banged up last year.
Number 91, a guy we just talked about, Brashard Perryman, wide receiver from Baltimore. It was their first-round pick in this year's draft. Steve Smith already said this is his last season. They only have Kamar Aiken and Marlon Brown behind him, so Perryman should be the number 2 receiver if he's healthy by the start of the season.
Hello there, number 2.
And let's not forget, if Steve Smith falls off, Brashard Perryman's going to be their number 1 receiver out there. They got rid of Turi Smith, obviously. Owen Daniels is gone as well.
It's scary right now because last year was the first year we had a bunch of rookie wide receivers make an impact in the league. There's been times where our rookies made an impact, but last year the most rookies in the same season made an impact. So rookie wide receivers in fantasy always scare me, but this guy has the size to be one of the rookies that make an impact. And really, other than Steve Smith and maybe rookie Max Williams, who else are they going to throw the ball to?
I agree. I think Perryman's going to have a decent season, though. I just see more and more of that rookie receivers having good seasons, man. The way the NFL goes right now, pass, 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 pass.
Wait, how does it go?
I think there's 5 of them. 4 of them?
5 passes?
4 or 5 passes.
All right.
All right, number 92, your boy, Tom Brady. Quarterback from the New England Patriots. Now, last season, a pretty good season. Went on to win the Super Bowl, obviously. 4,109 yards, 33 TDs compared to 9 interceptions. But he had no more than 249 yards passing or 1 TD in any of his first 4 games. Then he went on to have 10 straight multi-TD games, including 5 touchdowns versus Chicago and 4 versus both Buffalo and Denver. He had 5 300-yard games in that span, but he totaled 262 yards with just 1 touchdown and 1 pick over his final 2 games. Although the final game versus Buffalo, he had limited playing time because they were already in the playoffs and they didn't need to play him, so he only played a little bit. But he had 30 or more attempts 13 times, 53 or more attempts 3 times. They pretty much still have the same receivers out there in Gronkowski, Lafell, Edelman, but they did bring in Scott Chandler as well. They have Amendola out there as
Cheater!
Amendola's out there still. Aaron Dobson's out there still. As of now, Tom Brady's going to miss the first 4 games of the season. At number 92, I like him here if he misses the first 4 games. If he doesn't miss the first 4 games, you obviously want to move him up the list a little bit.
If he misses 1 game, where do we move him to?
I'm not even worried about 1 game. 1 game is like no games to me. Ben Roethlisberger, I have at number 65. I'm already on record saying Tom Brady is going to start to tail off a little bit. He's still going to be a good quarterback, but he's going to start to tail off a little bit. You look last season, his first 4 games, he wasn't very good. He's suspended for 4 games right now. If he was suspended for 4 games, had 4 bad games, you're looking at 8 games where he didn't help you. So, I don't know, but I'm going to say I still take Ben Roethlisberger over him. I'm going to say Tom Brady goes right behind him. I'd have him at number 66. I'd take Ben over Brady. And
all day.
Like I said, Brady's going to take a step back here very soon. I believe it's this year. Number 93, Devonta Freeman, running back from Atlanta. 248 yards last year, 1 touchdown, but he did have 30 receptions for 225 yards and a TD. This coming in his rookie season. He had more than 6 carries just twice. He had 11 versus Tampa Bay, 8 versus Arizona. He had no more than 38 yards rushing in any game. He was out with a hamstring strain, but returned to practice Monday, so he's coming back healthy. But they got Tevin Coleman out there now, who they drafted. Anton Smith's still out there, who had some injury problems last season. And they both Coleman and Smith, have injury problems right now themselves, along with Freeman, who's just returning, like I said. They got rid of Steven Jackson out there in Atlanta, who led the team last season with 707 yards and 6 TDs last season. Freeman actually led running backs in Atlanta in receptions and receiving yards. He's still just 23 years old, so he has some upside here. They just drafted Tevin Coleman. I think he might actually end up taking the job. Now, they're saying Freeman's the starter right now. Coleman is ranked higher on nearly everybody's board in fantasy. There's still a lot of questions, so you gotta let it play out. I have Coleman higher. I have Freeman here at 93, but you gotta pay attention. You gotta see who they think the starter is going to be. I think Tevin Coleman, though, does have the better chance to succeed in this backfield, while Freeman will be solid as a role player and solid in the passing game. But I see Tevin Coleman as the better running back in fantasy still. But let it play out and pay attention to Atlanta's backfield going into your draft. Number 94, Eric Decker, wide receiver from the New York Jets.
Going to be catching passes from Matt Flynn.
Matt Flynn now, is that their starter?
Nah, it's just who they signed. That doesn't mean he's going to start.
I was going to say, if they brought in Matt Flynn to start, that's ridiculous.
I mean, better than Fitzpatrick. I don't know if he's better than Fitzpatrick, but he's better than Bryce Petty right now. And Geno Smith.
Well, listen, Geno Smith punched in the face, done for 10 weeks or whatever. I actually like Ryan Fitzpatrick more than Geno Smith. I think this makes their offense a little better. Bryce Petty, he has future in him. So, I mean, the quarterback situation isn't too terrible out in New York right now. It actually made me move Brandon Marshall up the list a little bit when I heard Fitzpatrick was going to be the starting QB. Now, Eric Decker, if he put up the same numbers he put up last year, I would have him higher on this list. But now they have Brandon Marshall in there. Decker no longer the number one receiver out there. And really, I don't see two receivers being extremely successful in New York. But Decker, I mean, he's a solid veteran, and he's going to be consistent for you. Last season, 74 receptions on 115 targets, 962 yards, and 5 touchdowns in just 15 games played. He had double-digit targets 6 times. 5 or more receptions 7 times. He had 2 100-yard games, including 10 receptions for 221 yards and a touchdown in the last game of the season at Miami. And he had 3 touchdowns in his first 5 games, but just 2 touchdowns in his final 10 games. Like I said, Brandon Marshall's the number one out there. I see decreased targets for Eric Decker, but he's still a veteran. He's still a good player. He's going to put up solid numbers, just not what he did last season.
EDT3.
Number 95. This is another situation. You got to see what happens in Arizona. Now, I still like David Johnson here, running back from Arizona.
Better than Chris Johnson.
Yeah, I still like him better than Chris Johnson. Listen, they drafted this guy in the 3rd round this year. He's 6'1", 224 pounds. They brought him in to be the in-between the tackles back, I believe, and let Ellington play more out of the passing game. But we'll have to see what happens with Chris Johnson coming in here and see what they do with this backfield. But I really like David Johnson this season if they give him a shot. And he has a good chance of taking time away from Ellington as well. Like I said, he's more suited to run between the tackles than Ellington. But Johnson is also a very good receiver and very good in the passing game. And I actually heard him compared to Matt Forte a little bit. And if he could do anything like Matt Forte, obviously he's going to overtake Ellington, and Chris Johnson has no chance. But I really like David Johnson to carve out some kind of role on this team and give you solid value. Maybe not in the first or second game, but as the season goes along, I think this guy's going to get more involved and be a big part of this offense if they want to win. He is dealing with a hamstring injury, but he's expected to be healthy to start the season. That could hinder, like I said, he may not be starting week 1, week 2, or even week 3, but eventually this guy has to get into this offense. I think he is their best running back out there. Number 96, Cody Latimer, wide receiver from Denver. 2 receptions for 23 yards last season.
Beast-ass season.
That is beast mode. Now, he was their 2nd-round pick in 2014. He's 6'2", 215 pounds, and he's going to play the slot where Welker was playing. He had 49 receptions on 64 targets last season, 464 yards and 2 TDs. Obviously, though, Welker wasn't the same he used to be, and he's not a guy you can feature anymore.
His name's Wes
I think
Washed
Cody
Up
Latimer can put up better numbers than that in Denver's offense, considering he's younger. Although, like I said, 6'2", 215, he's not the typical slot receiver for you, but when you have Emmanuel Sanders and Demarius Thomas, you got to do what you got to do out there. But I see Latimer being a solid part of this offense this season. Julius Thomas is gone. Owen Daniels is in. I think Daniels will be targeted less than Thomas in the long run. So there's some targets coming Latimer's way, I believe. Andre Caldwell's the only one behind him. So he's definitely locked in as the number 3 receiver in Denver. But the problem is Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. They're going to command a ton of targets.
100 catches each, most likely.
Yeah, last season, 325 targets between those 2 receivers. So Latimer, he's not going to be targeted over 100 times. It's just not going to happen. But Peyton Manning can make
he loves a slot
3 receivers work out in this offense. And
He's done
he
it.
loves
He's
the
had
slot
3
receiver.
1,000-yard receivers in the season.
That's what I'm saying. So Cody Latimer, he's not going to be a beast by any means this season, at least not this season.
You could have a couple beast games. If you're in a deep league, 10, 12, 14 teams, he's somebody you might want to stash on your bench. And with good matchups, teams with, smaller corners or teams that struggle against the pass, Peyton Manning will definitely get him the ball.
Yeah, this is definitely a guy I am keeping on my target list. Yes, on my watch list going into the draft. Cody Latimer.
I'm watching you.
Number 97, another guy I'm somewhat watching, Davante Adams, wide receiver from Green Bay. He had 38 receptions on 66 targets last season, 446 yards with 3 touchdowns. And that coming as a rookie. He had one 100-yard game with 121 versus New England. He had 5 or more receptions, only 4 times, though. He had 2 receptions or less in the other 12 games. So he was very inconsistent. Just a rookie, though, like I said. Just 22 years old now. His second season with Rodgers. Rodgers is another guy that can make 3 receivers good in his offense. Obviously, Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb are going to get a ton of targets. So sort of like Latimer here. He's not going to get a ton of targets, but he can work well in this offense. He can give you big games. You might find a little bit of inconsistency in him, but he's definitely the number 3 receiver out there, just like Latimer in Denver. I like the upside here too.
I heard he may take over some kick and punt returning duties since Cobb's going to take a bigger step up in the offense. So you might even be able to get some points that way through Adams.
Please believe. Number 98, Tony Romo.
I'm surprised you have a 4-game suspended Brady above Tony Romo. Romo had a good year last year.
Yeah, 3,705 yards, 34 TDs, and 9 picks. Just 6 interceptions over his final 15 games, too. One 300-yard game with 324 yards versus Houston. So there's one reason why he still doesn't have a ton of 300-yard games, but he did have 11 multi-TD games. Obviously, Dez Bryant is a touchdown machine. At least he was last year. Like I said, talking about Dez Bryant, though, with DeMarco Murray gone, I think this offense is going to be a little bit different this season. We've seen Romo before. Last season was Romo's best year, and I think he's going to take a step back, obviously. You don't have career years every year. I think that was his career year. This guy's a 35-year-old. He's not going to turn into anything more than he is. With the best running back in the game gone, I mean, I still like Joseph Randle out there. I think he's going to be a good running back, but he's not DeMarco Murray. I think they're a little bit more one-dimensional without him. I mean, Terrence Williams is what they got behind Dez Bryant. They got Devin Street, Cole Beasley. I don't see many weapons on this offense for Tony Romo. He's taken a step back this season. I mean, this is still a pretty high ranking for him. It's not like I call him garbage here, but I definitely don't see the same type of season from Dallas this season.
Agreed. You're garbage, Dallas.
Number 99. Talked about this guy already, too.
God, 2 Cleveland running backs in the top 100.
Please believe, Duke Johnson, running back. He was their 3rd-round pick in this year's draft. Now, Terrence West had 171 carries for 673 yards and 4 TDs last season. Isaiah Crowell, 148 carries for 607 yards and 8 TDs. And Ben Tate, remember, he was playing for him for a while as well. He had 106 carries for 333 yards and 4 TDs.
So really we're looking at around about 400 carries and 1,600 total yards out of the running backs last year. So as a team, Cleveland ran the ball pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, if Duke Johnson turns into the feature back, though, I mean, you can give him most of the numbers.
Right, but that's what I'm just trying to point out to the fans, that although they didn't have one dominant back, they ran the ball well. So if they can find that back who can be a 3-down back, he could put up big yards.
Now, like I said, Isaiah Crowell, he's currently considered the starter, so we already talked about him. That's why I have him higher on the list. I do like Duke Johnson's chances, though, to take over the role later in the season if Crowell struggles in any way. And, I mean, Terrence West, he's going to get a little bit of play here and there. Ben Tate, obviously, gone. But it's either going to be Crowell or Johnson stepping up this season. You got to give it to Crawwell first just because they're starting him. But don't be surprised if Duke Johnson ends up being a steal here, even at number 99. And last on our list here, number 100. I had to move this guy up the list, man. I know he didn't throw many TDs last season.
Oh, it's going to be big year again this year for Matt Stafford.
Yeah, I'm talking about Matt Stafford, quarterback from Detroit. He still put up a lot of yards, 4,257 yards. The TDs down, like I said, just 22, and he had 12 picks. But he added 2 rushing TDs as well. Now, he had 8 multi-TD games, but he also had 4 games with 0 touchdowns. That's what really hurt him. But he still had 4 300-yard games as well, with 390 versus Chicago. And he had at least 30 attempts in all but one game, 40 or more attempts 7 times. You go back and look, man. 29 TDs in 2013. I'll take those numbers out of a fantasy quarterback. 41 TDs in 2011.
I had him then.
Yeah, so did I. And I'll take those numbers out of a quarterback. So, I mean, yeah, you look last season, Kelvin Johnson wasn't healthy,
Yeah, he was
obviously.
hurt.
Golden Tate came up huge. Now you got 2 very good receivers.
Eric Ebron's going to probably take a step up, too, at the tight end position.
Please believe. And you also have Joik Bell coming back, and someone better than Reggie Bush, I believe, in Ameer Abdullah. So there's weapons out there. Matt Stafford, he's not the quarterback he showed last season. He's going to have a bigger year, and this could actually be too low. Actually, I could see Matt Stafford having a better season than Tony Romo. I go with what Romo did last season, a little bit over Stafford, but I'm liking Stafford here as well.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me to see Stafford blow up for 30 touchdowns and 4,000 yards again. It really wouldn't shock me because I think last year was an aberration, something, a fluke basically for Stafford.
Couple people we're going to talk about from 101 to 125 are, like I said, Arizona. John Brown, I think he could step up and have a decent season. Anquan Bolden in San Francisco still. And Eddie Royal, a guy in Chicago that is going to see more playing time because Kevin White is injured. So this could be the number 2 guy out there. I kept saying I like Jay Cutler to make 2 receivers good in fantasy. Eddie Royal could be that second guy. I'm not going to put him where I put Kevin White, obviously. Eddie Royal isn't the same type of receiver, but I see good value out of Eddie Royal.
One of these players that are coming up are looking to cash in and could possibly be the highest played player in the NFL, so tune in to find out who that is. But that's all we got for you, fans. Thanks for hanging in there. You can follow us on Twitter at bet_the_spread. You can follow me on Twitter at betjimthewin. Check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/betthespread. Keep coming back to the YouTube page. Click subscribe. If you don't like our rankings, just let us know, and we'll tell you to go bleep yourself.